I found out my stepfather was getting it on with middle schoolers behind my mother's back, so I tracked him down and recorded it. But when my mom and I confronted him with the footage, he manipulated her into believing that I misunderstood what I saw and what he was doing wasn't wrong. When my mom got married, everyone expected me to be happy for her, but I wasn't. I couldn't be. Not because Dan wasn't a provider, he was. And not because he wasn't romantic, he was. But because I knew my mom, and I knew that she was easily manipulated. When I was 16, she found the devil's lettuce in my room, so I told her it wasn't mine, and I was just storing it for a friend, and she believed me straight away. So as the man of the house, I always knew it was my responsibility to watch over everyone in her life, including Dan. I always thought there was something off about the way he treated me, how he'd grip my shoulder a little too hard, how he'd stop smiling the second my mom wasn't looking, but all of these things could have passed as him just being moody or something, so I had to wait until I had some concrete evidence, something my mom couldn't dismiss. Well, a few weeks later I asked my mom if I could borrow Dan's work iPad. By this point I was 18 and needed it for a school assignment. No, that's his! Her reaction immediately set off alarm bells. Because my mom had a soft voice, sometimes I'd even get mad at her for not being more assertive with me and others. Sorry, she said right after. It's just that I tried to borrow it one time and Dan got really, angry. I stared at her blankly, watching her get flustered like she had just said something she wasn't supposed to. And why is that? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Oh, he told me the battery on the iPad gets damaged if anyone else uses it. You effing idiot, how could you believe that? I wanted to yell, but instead, I just nodded like it was the most reasonable explanation in the world. Okay, Mom, no problem. As soon as she went to sleep, I grabbed the iPad, because Dan was visiting his mom or something, so he wasn't home. It unlocked straight away, and I ran to his Telegram app. There was only one person he was texting on it. Gotcha, I thought to myself. When I clicked the profile picture, I expected it to be some photoshopped blonde girl, someone who was a downgrade from my mother. Instead, I was faced with a girl wearing braces and glasses. I covered my mouth with the palm of my hand and gasped, because he never told my mom he had a child. But as I read through the texts, I could practically hear the police sirens, because there were dozens of texts of him telling her how pretty she was, how no other girl could match up, how he loved being around her, blah 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 blah, all very disgusting. I had already decided that he was going to be disowned from the family, so I kept reading to get as much evidence as possible, and that's when I saw it. He wasn't at his mom's house, he was with her. Without thinking, I grabbed my car keys and drove straight there. It was a 2-hour drive, but I made it in an hour. The location ended up being a cabin in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't even get a Wi-Fi connection, and there were no other houses within a 3-mile radius. I pulled over on the side of the road and peered through the window. What I saw made me vomit so hard I thought my organs were about to fall out of my throat, because there he was, with what looked like a middle schooler, completely unclothed, performing The Beast with Two Backs, if you catch my drift. And as if that wasn't bad enough, I saw another girl, probably the middle schooler's friend there too, and I would have called the police straight away, except Dan was the chief of police. So instead I drove home, and when I arrived, I shook my mom awake. I didn't even give her time to wake up before shoving the phone in her face. This is where Dan is right now. Her face turned ghost white, and she called him to come home immediately. She made up some lame excuse about how much she needed him. Of course, honey, I'll be there soon. His voice sounded actually concerned, and that's when I realized just how much of a liar he really was. As soon as he got in the door, my mom threw my phone at him and screamed at him to watch the video. The whole time I hid behind the doorway, ready to step in if things went south. Baby, it's not what it looks like. Let me explain. When my mom sat down to listen, I smirked, thinking that she was tricking him. Baby, I get these uncontrollable urges. I'm talking to a therapist about it, but this is my outlet. It's to keep you safe. I thought she was going to slap him, or at least scream at him again, but instead, she lunged at him for a hug. I knew you'd have an explanation. I love you. She buried her face into his chest, and he kissed her forehead. Over her shoulder, he looked directly at me with a smirk that made my blood run cold. I stood there frozen, unable to believe what I was seeing. My own mother, choosing to believe this monster over her own eyes, over her own son. I felt sick all over again. The next morning, I confronted her while Dan was in the shower. I could hear the water running as I cornered her in the kitchen. How could you forgive him? I hissed. Did you even see what was on that video? She wouldn't look me in the eye. You don't understand adult relationships, she said, busying herself with making coffee. Dan has problems, but he's getting help. He loves me. Those were children, Mom. Children. I was trying not to yell, but it was hard. My hands were shaking with rage and disbelief. She just shook her head. You misunderstood what you saw. Dan explained everything. Those weren't real children. It was role-playing with consenting adults. That's when I realized I couldn't count on her. She was too deep under his manipulation. If anything was going to happen, I would have to do it myself. Over the next few days, I started gathering evidence. I installed a hidden camera app on my phone and recorded Dan whenever he was being sketchy. I wrote down every inconsistency in his stories about where he was going. I even started following him sometimes after school, though I was careful to stay far back so he wouldn't notice me. Dan must have sensed something was up because he started working on my mom. I'd overhear him telling her things like, I'm worried about your son. He seems unstable lately, always watching me, following me around. Maybe we should get him evaluated. My mom started looking at me differently, with suspicion. She'd ask me weird questions about my mental health, whether I was feeling paranoid, if I was sleeping okay. It was obvious what Dan was doing, turning her against me before I could expose him. Things at home got increasingly tense. Dan would accidentally bump into me in the hallway or squeeze my shoulder when no one was looking, always with this little smirk that said, she'll never believe you over me. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen and whispered, be careful, son. Accusations like that can ruin lives, including yours. Then last night, I overheard Dan on the phone in the garage. He was whispering about another weekend trip coming up. I knew exactly what that meant, and I couldn't let it happen again. Not to those girls, not to anyone. I'm making a plan now. I need to to get solid evidence that even my mom can't deny. Evidence I can take to police in another jurisdiction. I've been researching how to safely document this kind of thing without putting myself or those girls at risk. I've found some online resources for reporting crimes when the perpetrator is in law enforcement. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know I can't just sit back and do nothing. Dan is dangerous, and somehow I'm the only one who sees it. I'm scared, honestly. He's the chief of police. He has power. He has my mom completely fooled. Every time I see him in his uniform, with his badge and GN, I'm reminded of how much power he has. But those girls don't have anyone else, so I have to try. I'll update when I can. If anyone has been through something similar or has advice, I could really use it right now. I decided to start gathering evidence right away. The next morning, I drove to the electronics store and bought a small voice recorder. It was about the size of a USB stick, so I could easily hide it in my pocket. I also picked up a cheap burner phone with a decent camera. If Dan found my regular phone, I'd still have backup. I was nervous as hell spending the money, but this wasn't something I could half-aze. When I got home, Dan was sitting at the kitchen table with my mom. They both went quiet when I walked in, which was never a good sign. My mom looked like she'd been crying. "We need to talk," Dan said in his fake concerned voice. "Your mother and I are worried about you." I just nodded and sat down, keeping my face neutral. Inside, I was freaking out. Had he found out I was gathering evidence? Did he know I went to that cabin? "We think you might need some professional help," my mom said, not meeting my eyes. "Dan has a friend who's a psychiatrist. He could see you next week." I almost laughed. Of course Dan had a friend who could help me. Probably someone who owed him favors and would diagnose me with paranoid delusions or something. "I'm fine," I said, "just stressed about college applications." Dan leaned forward, putting his hand on my shoulder. I had to fight not to flinch away. "Son, we're concerned about these accusations, these delusions you're having about me. It's not healthy." I wanted to punch him in his smug face. Instead, I nodded and mumbled something about being tired. I agreed to see the psychiatrist just to get them off my back. As soon as I could, I escaped to my room and activated the voice recorder. From now on, every interaction with Dan would be documented. Over the next few days, I noticed Dan watching me constantly. He'd accidentally bump into me in the hallway or appear behind me when I was alone in a room. It was intimidation, pure and simple. He knew I was onto him, and he was letting me know he was watching too. My mom was completely under his spell. She started checking my room when I wasn't there. I could tell because things were slightly moved around. My laptop was always in a different position than where I left it. Once I caught her scrolling through my phone when I came out of the bathroom. "Just making sure you're okay," she said, looking guilty. "Dan thinks you might be involved in something dangerous." The irony was so thick I could choke on it. I just grabbed my phone back and walked away. I couldn't trust her anymore, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. Friday night, I overheard Dan telling my mom he had to work overnight. Another lie. I knew exactly what he was planning. As soon as he left, I grabbed my burner phone, voice recorder, and car keys. I followed him at a safe distance, staying at least 2 cars behind him at all times. He drove for about an hour before pulling into a motel parking lot. Not the cabin this time. This place was just off the highway, one of those cheap places where you pay cash and nobody asks questions. I parked across the street at a gas station and watched through binoculars as he knocked on room 114. The door opened and my stomach dropped. It was a different girl this time, even younger looking than the ones at the cabin. She couldn't have been more than 12. I felt sick, but forced myself to take pictures with the burner phone. Dan looked around the parking lot before going inside, but he didn't spot me. I waited about 20 minutes, then crept across to the motel. The curtains were closed, but there was a small gap where they didn't quite meet. I held up the phone and took video through the gap. I only recorded for about 30 seconds. I couldn't stomach seeing more than that, but it was enough. Clear evidence of what he was doing. Just as I was backing away, I stepped on something that made a loud cracking sound. A twig or something. The curtain suddenly moved, and I saw Dan's face appear in the window. Our eyes met for a split second before I took off running. I sprinted across the parking lot, hearing the motel room door slam open behind me. "Hey, stop right there!" Dan shouted, his voice carrying that authoritative police tone that makes most people freeze instinctively. Not me. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, zigzagging between parked cars. I could hear his footsteps pounding behind me. He was gaining on me. The guy was in good shape for his age. I reached the edge of the parking lot and darted across the highway, narrowly missing being hit by a truck. The driver honked loudly, and the truck separated me from Dan for a crucial few seconds. I used that time to dive into a drainage ditch beside the road, then scrambled up the other side into a wooded area. I kept running through the trees, branches whipping my face. I could hear Dan crashing through the underbrush somewhere behind me. "I know it's you," he yelled. "You're making a big mistake, kid." I didn't answer, just kept moving as quietly as I could now, trying to circle back toward the gas station where my car was parked. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. After what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, I made it back to my car. Dan was nowhere in sight. I got in and drove away as calmly as I could, not speeding, not drawing attention. About halfway home, I realized I'd dropped the burner phone somewhere during the chase. All that evidence, gone. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel in frustration. I'd have to start over. When I got home, my mom was waiting up. "Where were you?" she asked, arms crossed. "Dan called. He said he saw you at his crime scene. He said you ran when he tried to talk to you." Of course he'd come up with a cover story. "I was just driving around," I said. Needed to clear my head. I didn't see Dan anywhere. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. "He's worried about you. We're worried about you. This behavior isn't normal." I went to bed without arguing, but I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard Dan come home. He and my mom were talking in hushed voices downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs to listen, the voice recorder running in my pocket. "I don't think he's safe to have around," Dan was saying. "He's stalking me, Diane, following me to active crime scenes. What if he had contaminated evidence? I could lose my job. What should we do?" My mom sounded scared. Of me, her own son. "I think he needs inpatient treatment. My friend Dr. Mercer has a facility. Very discreet. They can help him." My blood ran cold. He was trying to have me committed. I went back to my room room and started packing a bag. I couldn't stay here anymore. It wasn't safe. The next morning, my mom told me we were going to talk to someone who could help. I knew exactly what that meant. I told her I needed to shower first, then climbed out the bathroom window with my backpack. I had about $200 in cash, my regular phone, and the voice recorder. Not much to go on, but it would have to do. I called my cousin Jacob from a bus stop payphone. We weren't super close, but he was the only relative who might believe me over Dan. He lived about an hour away and had always been the black sheep of the family, dropped out of college to start his own computer repair business. My mom always said he was a bad influence, which in this situation worked in my favor. Jacob, it's me. I need help. I'm in trouble. To his credit, Jacob didn't ask a lot of questions. Where are you? I'll come get you. I stayed hidden at the bus stop until Jacob's hit-up Honda pulled up. He looked exactly the same as the last time I'd seen him at Christmas. Shaggy hair, band t-shirt, perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. I'd never been so happy to see anyone in my life. You look like shit, he said as I got in the car. What's going on? I told him everything on the drive to his apartment. The cabin, the motel, Dan's manipulation, my mom's denial. Jacob didn't interrupt, just listened with a deepening frown. When I finished, he was quiet for a long minute. I always thought that guy was off, he finally said, the way he looks at people, like he's calculating something. You believe me? I asked, surprised at how my voice cracked. Course I do. Your mom's always been easily influenced, and cops can be the worst criminals because they know how to work the system. Jacob's apartment was small but clean. He cleared off his couch for me and ordered pizza. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe enough to really sleep. When I woke up the next morning, Jacob was at his computer. I've been thinking, he said. We need more evidence, something digital that can't be lost like that phone, and we need to be smarter about how we get it. Jacob was pretty tech savvy. He showed me how to set up an anonymous email account and how to encrypt files. We spent the day making a plan. Instead of following Dan physically, we'd try to trap him digitally. These guys are predictable, Jacob explained. They look for vulnerable kids online, so we create a profile that looks like his type, make contact, and record everything. It felt gross, creating a fake profile of a 13-year-old girl, but Jacob assured me this was a common tactic used to catch predators. We used an AI-generated photo that didn't belong to any real person and set up accounts on platforms where Dan might be looking for victims. For 3 days, nothing happened. I was getting antsy, pacing around Jacob's apartment. My mom had called about 50 times, alternating between angry voicemails about how I was breaking her heart and tearful ones begging me to come home and get help. Dan had filed a missing persons report, which Jacob found hilarious. Dude's the chief of police and he can't find someone staying one town over, he snorted. Not exactly Sherlock Holmes. On the 4th day, we got a hit. Someone with the username ProtectorD45 messaged our decoy account. The language, the approach, it was textbook grooming, just like the messages I'd seen on Dan's iPad. Jacob traced the IP address, and sure enough, it was coming from my house. We carefully responded, making sure to sound like an insecure young girl. Dan took the bait, getting increasingly explicit in his messages. Jacob recorded everything, backing it up to multiple secure locations. We need to get him to agree to meet, Jacob said. That's when we'll have him dead to rights. After 2 weeks of messaging, Protector D45 suggested meeting at a park in a neighboring town. We agreed, setting the date for Saturday afternoon. Our plan was to hide nearby with cameras, record him showing up, then take all our evidence to the state police, bypassing Dan's department entirely. The night before the meetup, someone pounded on Jacob's door around midnight. We both froze, looking at each other in panic. Jacob motioned for me to hide in the bedroom while he checked the peephole. Shh, he whispered. It's Dan. My heart nearly stopped. How had he found me? Jacob grabbed a baseball bat from beside the door and nodded at me to stay hidden. I crept into the bedroom but left the door cracked so I could hear. Officer, Jacob said loudly as he opened the door. What brings you here so late? Cut the crap. Dan's voice was ice cold. I know he's here. Your car was spotted near the bus stop where he disappeared. I don't know what you're talking about, Jacob said. I haven't seen my cousin in months. I heard a scuffle, then a loud thud. I peeked through the crack to see Dan shoving his way in, pushing Jacob against the wall. Listen to me, you little punk, Dan hissed. That kid is mentally unstable. He's been stalking me, making up sick stories. He needs help before he hurts someone. Jacob shoved back. Get your hands off me. You got a warrant to be here? Dan laughed, a chilling sound. I don't need a warrant when I'm concerned about a missing child. Now where is he? I couldn't let Jacob take the heat from me. I stepped out of the bedroom, the voice recorder running in my pocket. I'm right here. Dan's eyes locked onto me, and for a second, his mask slipped. The hatred in his eyes was unmistakable. Then the concerned stepfather persona snapped back into place. Thank God you're safe, he said, stepping toward me. Your mother's been worried sick. We need to get you home, get you some help. I'm not going anywhere with you, I said, backing up. I know what you are, what you do to those girls. Dan's face hardened. See what I mean? Delusions, paranoia. He turned to Jacob. His therapist thinks he might be having a psychotic break. He needs medication. Jacob moved to stand beside me. I think you should leave, officer. He's safe here. Dan's hand moved to rest on his hip near his GN. He wasn't in uniform, but I knew he carried off duty. I'm not leaving without him. What happened next is still a blur. Dan lunged forward to grab me. Jacob stepped between us. There was a struggle, and suddenly Dan had Jacob in a chokehold. I could see Jacob's face turning red as he gasped for air. Stop it! You're culling him! I screamed. Dan loosened his grip slightly. Get your things. We're leaving. Now, or your cousin here might have an unfortunate accident. I had no choice. I grabbed my backpack, making sure the voice recorder was still running in my pocket. As we walked out to Dan's car, he kept a tight grip on my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. You've been a real pain in my A's, he muttered as he shoved me into the passenger seat. I tried to be nice about this, but you just wouldn't listen. Where's Jacob? I asked, looking back at the apartment. Taking a little nap, Dan said with a smirk that made my stomach turn. He'll wake up with a headache, but he'll live. If he's smart, he'll forget all about this. Dan started driving, but we weren't heading toward home. We were going in the opposite direction, toward the county line. Where are we going? I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Somewhere we can talk privately, Dan said. About about all these stories you've been telling, about all the trouble you've been causing me. I knew then that he had no intention of taking me home. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I subtly checked that my phone was still in my pocket. It was. Dan had been too angry to search me properly. As we drove down a dark stretch of highway, I pulled out my phone and held it low, out of Dan's sight. I opened my messages and sent my location to Jacob, along with one word: help. Dan turned onto a dirt road that led into the woods, the same woods where the cabin was. My heart pounded as I realized where he was taking me. Somewhere isolated, somewhere no one would hear me scream. You know, Dan said conversationally, I really did try with you. Tried to be a good stepdad, but you just couldn't accept me, could you? Had to keep pushing, snooping around in things that weren't your business. Those girls are children, I said, unable to keep quiet anymore. What you're doing is sick. Dan's hand shot out, grabbing my throat. The car swerved as he squeezed, his eyes still on the road. You don't know anything about me, about what I need. Your mother understands. She accepts me as I am. I clawed at his hand, gasping for air. He let go after a few seconds, leaving me coughing and sputtering. We're going to fix this problem tonight, he said calmly, one way or another. The cabin came into view, dark and isolated just like before. Dan parked and dragged me out of the car. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely walk. He pushed me toward the cabin door. Inside, now. I stumbled through the door, frantically looking around for anything I could use as a weapon. The cabin was empty. No girls this time. Just a bed, a table, and some chairs. Dan closed the door behind us and locked it. Sit down, he ordered, pointing to a chair. I sat, watching as he paced back and forth. He seemed to be thinking, planning. Finally, he stopped and looked at me. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to call your mother and tell her you're sorry for running away. You're going to say you made up all those stories about me because you were jealous of our relationship. Then you're going to agree to go to that facility I mentioned. A few months there, some heavy medication, and no one will believe anything you say about me ever again. And if I don't? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Dan smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Then I'll have to handle this differently. Troubled teen runs away, gets lost in the woods. Tragic accident. It happens. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Dan's eyes narrowed. Give me that, he snapped, holding out his hand. I reluctantly handed over my phone. He looked at the screen and his face darkened. It was a message from Jacob. On my way. Hang tight. Dan threw the phone against the wall, shattering it. You little shht, he growled, grabbing me by the collar and yanking me to my feet. You think your loser cousin can help you? By the time he figures out where we are, this will all be over. He shoved me back down into the chair so hard it nearly tipped over. Then he pulled out his gun and set it on the table. A clear threat. Make the call, he said, pushing his own phone toward me. Now. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. I needed to stall until Jacob could get here. What about those girls? I asked. Are you just going to keep hurting them? Dan's expression changed, becoming almost thoughtful. You know, that's the thing you don't understand. They want to be with me. I treat them special, make them feel loved. It's not like I'm hurting them. They're children, I said again. They can't consent. You're using your position, your authority to manipulate them. Like your mother? Dan laughed. She's not much different, you know. So desperate for love she'll believe anything I tell her, even when the truth is staring her right in the face. I felt sick hearing him talk about my mom that way, but I kept him talking. Is that why you married her? To have cover? A normal-looking life? Dan shrugged. Partly. Plus, having a stepson your age made me seem trustworthy to the girls. Family man and all that. He glanced at his watch. Enough stalling. Make the call. Just then, headlights swept across the window. Dan cursed and grabbed his GN, moving to look outside. Who the hell is that? I used his distraction to grab the voice recorder from my pocket. I'd been recording this whole conversation. I quickly slid it under the chair cushion just as Dan turned back to me. Your cousin's dumber than I thought, he said, checking his gun. Stay here. Don't move. He went to the door and opened it slightly, keeping his GN hidden behind his back. I heard him call out, "Can I help you?" But it wasn't Jacob's voice that answered. It was my mom's. Dan, what are you doing here? Where's my son? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom was here? How? Dan stepped outside, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. I could hear them arguing in hushed voices. This was my chance. I grabbed the voice recorder and looked for somewhere to hide it where Dan wouldn't find it, but where it would be safe if things went bad. I spotted a loose floorboard near the wall and quickly pried it up, dropping the recorder inside. The door burst open and my mom rushed in, her eyes wild with fear and something else, determination. Dan followed, looking furious. Mom? I stood up, shocked to see her. How did you find me? Jacob called me, she said, moving to stand between me and Dan. He said Dan was taking you somewhere. He tracked your phone. Dan slammed the door shut. This is ridiculous. Diane, I told you he needs help. Professional help. I brought him here to talk some sense into him before taking him to Dr. Mercer's facility. My mom turned to face Dan, her back straight, her voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. In a cabin in the woods, in the middle of the night, with a gun? Dan's face changed, the mask slipping again. You don't understand what's happening here. Your son has been spreading lies about me. Dangerous lies that could ruin my career, my life. I found the iPad, Dan, my mom said quietly. After you left tonight, I saw the messages. All of them. The color drained from Dan's face. For a second, he looked like he might collapse. Then his expression hardened. So what? He said, his voice cold. What are you going to do about it? Who's going to believe you over me? I'm the chief of police. You're a waitress with a history of depression and a mentally unstable son. I expected my mom to back down, to crumble under his words like she always did. Instead, she stepped closer to him. I made a recording of those messages, she said. I sent copies to my sister, my lawyer, and the state police. If anything happens to me or my son, they'll know exactly who did it. I stared at my mom in shock. This wasn't the same woman who had hugged Dan after seeing that video. Something had changed. Dan seemed equally shocked. He looked from my mom to me, then back again. His hand tightened on his gun. You're bluffing, he said, but he didn't sound certain. Try me, my mom replied. Now put the GN down and step aside. We're leaving. For a tense moment, I thought Dan might shoot us both. His face twisted with rage and something like panic. Then, slowly, he lowered the GN. This isn't over, he said. You have no idea who you're messing with. My mom took my hand and pulled me toward the door. door. As we stepped outside, we saw headlights approaching fast. Jacob's car skidded to a stop beside my mom's. He jumped out, holding a baseball bat. "Are you okay?" he called, running toward us. I brought help. Behind his car, 2 more vehicles pulled up. State police. Jacob must have called them after contacting my mom. Dan appeared in the doorway of the cabin, his GN now hidden. When he saw the police cars, his face went completely blank. The mask was back in place. "Officers," he said, stepping forward with his hands visible. "Thank you for coming. I was just about to call for backup. I found my missing stepson, but he's in a disturbed state. I'm concerned for his safety." The state troopers looked confused, glancing between Dan in his civilian clothes and the 3 of us standing by the cars. "Chief Morgan," one of them said, "what's going on here?" Before Dan could answer, I spoke up. "There's a voice recorder under the floorboard in there. It has everything he just said to me on it. Everything about what he does to those girls." Dan's confident expression faltered. One of the troopers looked to my mom for confirmation. "My son is telling the truth," she said firmly, "and I have additional evidence on my phone. Please, just listen to the recording." The older trooper nodded to his partner, who went into the cabin. A tense minute passed as we all waited. Dan stood perfectly still, his eyes darting between us and the cabin door. When the trooper emerged, his face was grim. He nodded once to his partner, who immediately moved toward Dan. "Daniel Morgan, you need to come with us," he said. "We have some questions for you." "This is ridiculous," Dan protested as the trooper took his arm. "I'm the chief of police. You can't seriously be taking their word over mine." "It's not their word, sir," the trooper said quietly. "It's yours, on that recording." As they led Dan to the police car, he looked back at me with pure hatred in his eyes. I stared back, not backing down. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of him. My mom put her arm around me, and I was surprised to find I was shaking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have believed you from the beginning." I wanted to be angry with her, to demand why she had chosen him over me for so long. But seeing her now, standing up to Dan, calling the police herself, I realized something had changed. She had found her strength when it mattered most. "How did you know?" I asked, as we watched the police car drive away with Dan in the back seat. "What made you finally believe me?" My mom looked down, ashamed. "After you ran away, I kept thinking about that video you showed me. Something didn't add up about Dan's explanation. So I started looking through his things when he wasn't home. I found the iPad hidden in his GN safe. The combination was my birthday." She paused, swallowing hard. "I saw everything. All the messages, pictures he'd saved, and I realized you were right all along." Jacob joined us, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, man?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was okay. I felt numb, exhausted, but also relieved. It was over. Dan couldn't hurt those girls anymore. Couldn't hurt us anymore. "What happens now?" I asked as we walked to the cars. "Now we give our statements," my mom said. "All of us. And we make sure Dan never hurts anyone again." As we drove away from the cabin, following the state police back to their headquarters, I looked out at the dark woods passing by. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The monster was caught. The nightmare was over. But I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, investigations, maybe even a trial. Those girls would need help, support, and my mom and I had a lot of healing to do, a lot of trust to rebuild. Still, as I watched the sunrise begin to lighten the sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. We had survived. We had fought back. And somehow, against all odds, we had won. The state police station was buzzing with activity when we arrived. They put us in separate rooms to take our statements. I was nervous as hell sitting in that little interview room. It reminded me of TV shows where they interrogate criminals, except I was the victim this time. The female officer who took my statement was named Officer Martinez. She was patient and let me tell the whole story from the beginning without interrupting much. I told her everything, finding the iPad, the cabin, the motel, the chase through the woods, Dan attacking Jacob, and finally what happened at the cabin tonight. When I mentioned the voice recorder hidden under the floorboard, she nodded like she already knew about it. They'd found it and were processing it as evidence. "You took an enormous risk," she said when I finished. "Following him like that, he could have seriously hurt you." I just shrugged. What else could I have done? Let him keep hurting those kids? After about 2 hours of questions, they finally let me see my mom and Jacob. Jacob had a nasty bruise forming on his neck from where Dan had choked him, but otherwise seemed okay. My mom looked completely drained, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, she pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "I'm so sorry," she kept whispering. "I'm so sorry." Officer Martinez brought us coffee and sandwiches from the vending machine. Not exactly a 5-star meal, but I suddenly realized I was starving. While we ate, she explained what would happen next. "We've already contacted the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit," she said. "Based on the evidence we've gathered so far, they're taking over the case. Chief Morgan is being held without bail pending formal charges." "What about those girls?" I asked, the sandwich turning to ash in my mouth. "The ones at the cabin? The motel?" Officer Martinez's expression softened slightly. "We're working on identifying them now. They'll get the help they need." It was nearly dawn by the time they let us go home. Jacob offered to let us stay at his place, but my mom wanted to go back to our house. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I understood. It was still our home, not Dan's. The house felt different when we walked in, emptier somehow, despite all of Dan's stuff still being there. My mom immediately started gathering his things, throwing them into garbage bags with surprising force. "I don't want a single trace of him left," she said, yanking his uniforms from the closet. I helped her, feeling a weird mix of satisfaction and disgust as we purged the house of everything Dan. We both jumped when the doorbell rang around noon. It was 2 FBI agents, a man and a woman in matching dark suits. They looked exactly like you'd expect FBI agents to look. Serious, professional, slightly intimidating. "Mrs. Morgan?" the female agent asked. "It's Ms. Walker now," my mom corrected her firmly. "I'm going back to my maiden name." They nodded and showed their badges. "I'm Agent Reeves. This is Agent Donovan. We'd like to ask you both some additional questions, if that's all right." The questioning was even more detailed than with the state police. They had laptops with them and showed us images of several young girls, asking if we recognized any of them from the cabin or Dan's messages. I identified 2 that I was certain certain about. My mom recognized one from a photo on Dan's iPad. You've both been incredibly helpful, Agent Reeves said after several hours. We've already executed search warrants on Chief Morgan's office, his vehicle, and several storage units registered in his name. My stomach dropped. Storage units? Agent Donovan nodded grimly. We believe he may have been recording his encounters, possibly distributing material online. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. The idea that there might be videos out there, that other people might have seen what those girls went through, made me physically sick. My mom was pale when I came back, her hands shaking as she clutched a glass of water. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, FBI questions, and reporters camping outside our house. The story broke in the local news first, then got picked up by bigger outlets. Police chief arrested in child sex abuse investigation. The headlines made me sick every time I saw them. My mom took a leave of absence from work. She couldn't handle the stares and whispers. I skipped school, unable to face my classmates. We became hermits, only leaving the house when absolutely necessary. Jacob was our lifeline. He brought us groceries, ran interference with nosy neighbors, and kept us updated on what was happening with the case. Apparently, Dan was denying everything, claiming I had some kind of vendetta against him and had fabricated the evidence. Nobody's buying it, Jacob assured us. The voice recording is damning. Plus, they found a ton of stuff in those storage units. Photos, videos, journals. The guy was meticulous about documenting everything. About a week after Dan's arrest, we got another visit from the FBI agents. This time, they had news. We've identified 8 victims so far, Agent Reeves said gently. Girls between the ages of 11 and 14. Based on the evidence, we believe the abuse has been going on for at least 5 years, predating his relationship with you. My mom made a small, wounded sound. So he married me as, what, cover? Agent Donovan nodded. It appears so. Having a family life gave him credibility in the community, made him seem trustworthy to parents. I thought about all those monthly visits to his mother that started right after they got married. He'd been doing this the whole time, right under our noses. There's something else you should know, Agent Reeves added. We found evidence that Morgan wasn't acting alone. There may be others involved, possibly including other law enforcement officers. That hit me like a punch to the gut. If there were other cops involved, how deep did this go? Who could we actually trust? The investigation expanded rapidly after that. 3 other officers from Dan's department were arrested the following week. The mayor called for an independent review of the entire police force. The FBI set up a special hotline for potential victims to come forward. Through it all, my mom and I tried to put our lives back together. It wasn't easy. Some people in town treated us like we were somehow complicit, like we should have known sooner. Others were sympathetic but didn't know what to say, so they avoided us entirely. The worst part was the victims. I couldn't stop thinking about those girls, what they'd been through. Agent Reeves told us they were getting counseling, that their families were supporting them, but it didn't ease the knot of guilt in my stomach. I should have figured it out sooner, should have done something earlier. One night, about a month after everything went down, my mom knocked on my bedroom door. I was lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, something I'd been doing a lot lately. Can we talk? She asked, sitting on the edge of my bed. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We hadn't really talked, since that night at the cabin. I keep thinking about what I did, she said quietly. How I didn't believe you, how I chose him over you. I swallowed hard. You believed him because you wanted to, because the truth was too horrible. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was weak. I've always been weak. My whole life, I've let other people make decisions for me, tell me what to think. Your father did it. Then Dan. I never stood up for myself, or for you. But you did, in the end, I reminded her. You found the iPad yourself. You called the police. You stood up to Dan at the cabin. She wiped her eyes. Only after you'd done all the hard work. Only after you'd put yourself in danger because I was too blind to see what was happening. I sat up and hugged her. For the first time in forever, it felt like I was comforting her instead of the other way around. We both messed up, I said. I should have found a better way to show you the truth. Should have gotten help sooner. She shook her head. You did everything right. You're the strongest person I know. We sat there for a long time, not saying anything else. Something had shifted between us. We weren't just mother and son anymore. We were survivors of the same nightmare. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after Dan's arrest. The prosecutor told us we probably wouldn't need to testify. The evidence was overwhelming, but we should be prepared just in case. I spent hours with a victim advocate, practicing what I would say if called to the stand. The day before the hearing, Agent Reeves called with news. Dan had accepted a plea deal. In exchange for a slightly reduced sentence, he would provide information about the other officers involved and spare the victims from having to testify. He's looking at a minimum of 30 years, she told us, with no possibility of parole for at least 25. He'll be an old man before he has any chance of getting out. I felt nothing, not relief, not satisfaction, just empty, like all the emotion had been drained out of me over the past weeks. What about the other guys? I asked. Their cases are proceeding. Morgan's testimony will help, but we have solid evidence against them regardless. After I hung up, I found my mom in the kitchen, making dinner, actually cooking, not just microwaving something. It was the first time she'd made a real meal since everything happened. Dan took a plea deal, I told her. He's going away for at least 30 years. She nodded, continuing to chop vegetables. I heard. Agent Reeves called me too. How do you feel about it? She put down the knife and looked at me, like it's not enough, like no punishment could ever be enough for what he did, but also relieved that it's over, that we can start to move forward. Moving forward. It sounded so simple, but I knew it wouldn't be. The nightmares weren't going to stop overnight. The town wasn't going to forget. Those girls would carry what happened to them for the rest of their lives, but maybe we could start small. My mom had enrolled in community college classes, something she'd always wanted to do, but Dan had discouraged. I was thinking about going back to school, maybe joining the photography club. Jacob had become a regular visitor, bringing his weird humor and terrible cooking attempts into our quiet house. 2 months after Dan's plea deal, we got a letter from one of the victims' mothers. She thanked us for our courage, for bringing Dan to justice. She said her daughter was doing better, starting to smile again, even making plans for the future. I read that letter a dozen times. It was the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, some good had come out of all this horror. We weren't okay. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time, but we were getting there, one day at a time, and for now, that was enough.